We had a great question come in about the importance of neutral spine in yoga. And before I read the question itself, just a super quick review of what neutral spine is, just so we're all on the same page. So, a neutral spine is a spine that has not moved out of or away from anatomical position, which is in anatomy, anatomical position is this frame of reference we use for just like ground zero. In anatomical position, we have not moved. And then if we move, like if I round my spine or if I flex my spine, then I'm not in a neutral spine anymore because I've left anatomical position. And often it's defined as a spine in which we still have like our like natural spinal curves, which the lumbar spine is a lordotic curve in most people. It curves in. The thoracic spine is a kyphotic curve, which curves out. And then the cervical spine, the neck spine curves in. It's a lordotic curve. Okay, so with that intro aside, let's get to the question, which was submitted by Karen. And Karen asks, what do you think about the importance of spinal neutrality in a yoga practice? I was taught that when in doubt, check for spinal neutrality, something along those lines. I think a lot of yoga poses try to keep the spine neutral unless it is very clear that the pose asks for a non neutral spine like back bends. How would you advise someone with a slight hunchback for spinal neutrality, or will that come with continued practice? So that is our question. And I have a couple things to say about the importance of spinal neutrality in yoga. The first that I just kind of want to get out of the way is that, in my experience at least, I find that in many places in the yoga world, we tend to find an emphasis on the importance of a neutral spine based on these ideas that are now outdated and have been outdated actually for a while, that are outdated in the research, but these ideas that rounding or flexing the spine is inherently bad and injurious and is a movement that we should avoid. So there's a lot of talk out there about such ideas, but they are not supported by the current evidence we have about spinal biomechanics and about pain science and injury risk and all of that. So I'm not going to get into those details in this video, but I will link a blog post that I have that's a great resource that includes like a write-up I made, but also a whole bunch of research references and a podcast episode, an interview that we did with Dr. Samuel Spinelli on this topic. So there's a lot there if you actually want to dive into that. But suffice it to say, we do not need to worry that rounding the spine is somehow inherently non optimal or damaging, or is a movement that we should go out of our way to avoid in yoga. So I just want to say that because in the yoga world, I find we're often taught that a neutral spine is super important for injury prevention or pain prevention, ideas like this, things that are more on the fear-based alignment side of things, or the like, let's avoid certain movements because they're supposedly bad for us. So in the context of this course, we don't take perspectives like that because we're all about actually research and the science of movement. We know that it's totally fine to round the spine if we want to. And ultimately, our spine consists of over 75 individual joints all throughout the spine. So it was really evolved to move. It's of course also evolved to hold still and hold, quote, like stable when we move, like core stability or something. So we want that ability to hold our spine still as we maybe move our limbs around, but we also want the ability to move our spine, and doing so helps like preserve the health of the spine. So we want to move it in all the ways it can move. One point to add on to this conversation about a neutral spine that really comes into play for us as yoga teachers and yoga practitioners is that research on spinal biomechanics has also revealed that whenever we come into hip flexion, so for example, a hip hinge, something like this, like our halfway lift in yoga, or reaching down for, say, a kettlebell to deadlift and lift it up, those types of movements are hip hinge movements. So whenever we hip hinge, or when we squat, when we come down into this is a squat versus a hinge, whenever we do those movements, even if we think that our spine is staying neutral, and even if we try as yoga teachers to cue our students to maintain a neutral spine, whether we realize it or not, At a vertebral level, our spine will round. It's just an inevitable movement that happens when we move into hip flexion. And it's not necessarily visible to the outside eye. And that's also a good point to bring up, which is just that we can't, with our outside eye, we cannot see a lot about a yoga student's bony alignment. So often we also have these ideas in the yoga world about the importance of a neutral pelvis and a neutral spine. It kind of all can, be related, but we cannot actually assess, and we know this from research, we can't assess with our naked eye from the outside whether someone's pelvis or their spine is truly in neutral or not, because inside there can be movement happening that we can't see. So these just aren't really things we can know or see with our eyes. But I also just think it's important for us as yoga teachers to know that whenever we flex our hips, we are rounding the spine, whether we want to be or not. It's just inevitable. So when we kind of take a step back and realize that, we just realize that rounding the spine is just kind of a natural part of human movement. And so many of the movements we do on a day-to-day basis, and also in a yoga practice and in strength training, etc. It's just not a movement we need to inherently fear or fear monger about or try to avoid, because we can't avoid it. It's just going to happen. So I think that's an important point to keep in mind. Now, with all of that as a preface, when it comes to neutral spine, let's talk about the importance of neutral spine. So, to me, and like in the context of this course and the information that I present, I like the idea, and I do teach a neutral spine at times, because I think that it's really helpful for body awareness, for us to know when we're moving our spine and when we're not. And we have to, of course, acknowledge the caveat I just said, which is that when we come into hip flexion, we are actually, rounding a little bit. It's like at the vertebral level, we may or may not sense it. So I'm not talking about that, like that fine-tuned detail, but I just mean in general, I think it's helpful body awareness wise for us to know when our spine is holding still and then we're moving other parts of the body without the spine moving, versus letting the spine like move as we move other parts of the body. So for body awareness, it can be really helpful to just know our spine and understand how to like stabilize it as we move and how to move it. So I like neutral spine as a concept for that. And that's typically how I would use it, is just if we're doing some sort of movement on the mat where I really want to try to isolate the movement, say, for example, to the hip or something. Maybe I want to do like a knee lift in standing, and maybe I really want it just to be a hip movement and not more of a global movement where both my hip and spine move. Then I might use cues that try to encourage a neutral spine. Sometimes I'll say neutral spine because I do feel like many of my yoga students in my classes are familiar with that concept, but I know that the broader population is not necessarily familiar with like what that even means. So sometimes it could be helpful to try to describe that in other ways. A way that I like to use a lot is just to say, lengthen up through the crown of your head, or like picture a string attached to the crown of your head, someone pulls up. Because if you find that kind of feeling of length, what that will do is it will create this kind of 360-degree activation around your spine and just add a little more tension all the way around. And that's really good if what we're doing is maybe we just want to lift the knee and really only isolate the hip movement, versus lift the knee, pull it all the way into our chest and let the spine round. So, or if we want to, I think this example comes out for me a lot. Like if I teach like active hip circles, if we take a leg back behind us, it could be really helpful to understand how to hold a neutral spine and pelvis, because it's really easy to take the leg back and then tip the pelvis forward and then back bend. But what if we're really just wanting to isolate the back of the hip and maybe the hamstrings and get some fire going there? Then we would want to know, it's helpful for us to know in our bodies how to keep the spine and pelvis neutral so that we can just press back and really trying to turn up and maybe get some cramping happening like through the back of the hip and thigh. So those are the types of ways that I would use the concept of neutral spine. Another couple examples might be bird dog, I think is a really good one where this can often come up. So we probably are familiar with bird dog. That's that cross body reach where you reach an opposite arm and an opposite leg. And this tends to be taught as like a core stability challenge where we're really trying to hold our spine still and then just isolate the arm and the leg. But it's very common for us, to kind of lose touch with that. And just as we reach an arm and a leg, we can kind of let the spine move as well. And I'm kind of exaggerating it, but this kind of thing where the spine is actually moving. So instead, it could be a nice idea in bird dog to cue something like pull your hands back toward your knees and maybe your knees forward toward your hands. This is like isometric to help fire up the core and create this tension. And then at the same time, reach forward through the crown of your head, maybe even reach down through your tailbone at the same time. So all of that is just going to kind of hug in around this region and help control it better. And then you try to keep that as you then reach long through an opposite arm and an opposite leg without, arching the spine, but try to hold reaching forward through the crown of the head. And then this becomes a more controlled bird dog because we're able to access our neutral spine. And then we can just isolate the movement more to shoulders and hips. Here's a final example that I'll throw in here because I think it just helps illustrate. We know Urdhva Hastasana in yoga, take the arms up. We do it all the time. It's part of our sun salutation sequencing. So we can lift the arms up and we could lift the chest a little bit and kind of come into, a little bit of a back bend as the arms are up. That's one way to do it. Or we could really try to isolate mobility and mobilizing to the shoulders. In which case we would want to try to keep a neutral spine and then just lift the shoulders. And our arms in total might not lift as high because we did not also lift the chest. So, but if you keep a neutral spine and really just try to lift the shoulders or the arms, or go in this direction, just try to lift the shoulders without rounding the spine, but try to keep a neutral spine and just lift, then we have a real potential to work on some mobility drills. Here, I would be working the posterior shoulder muscles in a shortened position, but just more potently than if I also let the movement be a little more global and let the spine round. And then here too, here I can work the opposite side shoulder muscles to pull my arm into full flexion, but without also arcing my spine, which can just make it a little less potent for the shoulders. So arms up overhead is a place where you might think of cueing either neutral spine or something to help encourage neutral spine. Maybe something like, as your arms lift up, can you lift the back of your rib cage? So you could cue, as your arms lift, also lift up the back of your rib cage. I don't know, that's a little bit wordy. Maybe that's not the best way to say it, or lift the back of your heart, things like that, just to help kind of control and support the idea of spinal neutrality as we isolate the arms.